Well, congratulations to all of the awardees. That was a really special last hour that we got to spend together. We now get to move on to our keynote address, and I'll keep this introduction brief. Oh, well, that's okay. I want to introduce our moderator. Our moderator tonight is Brot Coburn. Brot is a visiting assistant professor at Colorado College and has worked on conservation and development projects in Nepal and South Asia for 2 of the past 5 decades. He has written or edited 9 books, including 2 New York Times bestsellers, as well as co-edited a title for the Wyoming Wilderness Association, ahead of their time, Wyoming Voices for Wilderness. Brot serves on NRCC's Board of Advisors and lives in Wilson. And I hope you'll join me in welcoming Brot to the stage.
Thanks very much, Katie, and also thanks to Peyton and Rich Wallace. Rich was the outstanding moderator today for the symposium. And I think we're all here with a common goal: to create a healthier world for all of us and for the environment that we depend upon. But we're now witnessing a slow-motion, quiet crisis of environmental challenges and decline that has visibly ramped up in the past few decades, even. What some scientists who study the global impacts of humanity have termed the Great Acceleration. So how do we navigate this era of environmental uncertainty, loss, and what Andrew Hansen termed unthinkable threats? Well, briefly, for those of you who weren't here for today's symposium, it brought together some of the people who were quietly working in each of their own ways on this greater project of preserving our precious natural world. Katie Christensen set an inspiring tone and a soulful and personal introduction, especially because she's a mom with of 2 kids. She asked, "What do we owe the future?" Then NRCC co-founder Susan Clark urged us to ask the big questions, which she is notorious for asking her students at the Yale School of the Environment, making them just the right amount of uncomfortable. Well, our esteemed town council member, Jonathan Schechter, asked, "How do we leave things better?" and answered that we all need to plug our individual actions and experience into the great mosaic that is the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. Andrew Hansen of MSU discussed his students' assessments of wildland's vital signs and found deterioration, probably no surprise there, especially of songbird populations. And Bob Kiter of the University of Utah outlined the head-spinning legal and jurisdictional complexity of the organizations and the stakeholders that operate in the GYE, and pointed out that we're still trying to establish a unifying policy that was initiated years ago by the Greater Yellowstone Coordinating Committee. And Todd Wilkinson showed how the Gallatin Valley is squarely on track to reach the population of Minneapolis within the lifetimes of many of us. But he's also seen that young people, the so-called Gen Z, are keenly yearning to rally around a big idea. Who is going to rescue us, Todd asked. We don't have a lot of time. And nature cinematographer Jake Davis screened one of the truly remarkable nature films. Some of the images shot with an array of high-def camera traps. And you'll see more of Jake, including at an event at the Teton Raptors Center in the next couple of months. But I'd like to give a shout out especially to the dedicated and mostly young people who delivered the genuinely inspiring 6-minute talks, the quick talks today, and those who participated in the panel discussions and who created the posters that you see in the gallery and in the skywalk. At the risk of sounding hyperbolic, they are all beacons of hope. I certainly wish that my aging head here was able to retain a lot of what I learned today. Now, there's some required reading for this session, and it's the book by Susan Clark and Anna Lambert, just published, on our iconic and beloved Grizzly 399. But this book is really about the context that 399 lived in, which means it's really about us and our beliefs and our institutions and the ways we struggle to protect 399's habitat and ecosystem. You can download a free digital edition of this by scanning the QR code on the poster that's out in the lobby. And today's symposium will be made available online, and I'd urge you to view the quick talks, especially if you didn't see them today. Now, I'd like to I'm honored to introduce Dr. Christina Cromley Bruner, who is here today to talk about something she spent her entire career uncovering, that saving democracy and saving the environment are, at their core, the same challenge. She began that journey in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem as one of Susan Clark's doctoral students. Being new to the West and to the resource issues here, she recognized the value of listening. She listened to ranchers and tribal leaders, conservationists and federal land managers, state veterinarians, activists, journalists, and everyday residents of Jackson Hole and the broader ecosystem. Although the conversations were about managing grizzly bears, bison, wolves, and elk, she saw two themes emerge that have more to do with how people relate to each other. First, the need for structures and processes that help communities find common interest solutions. And second, the need for governance that allows the community to adapt as conditions change. Those ideas form the foundation of her co-authored books, Finding Common Ground and Adaptive Governance. Christina carried that work forward as Director of Policy at American Forests, helping forest-dependent communities build healthier forests and healthier economies. She then spent 2 decades in federal oversight, working to ensure that public resources serve the public, not special interests, at the Interior and Energy offices of Inspector General. She left government last year, but continues to serve the public as the co-founder and executive director of 4250 More, a nonprofit dedicated to strengthening democratic institutions, the topic of her talk. So we're excited to have her back to offer us some valuable tools for thinking about and navigating the future. Please welcome Dr. Christina Cromley Bruner.
Good evening. So it's really exciting to be back here. As I was flying in, I forgot how truly stunning this place is, and really what a special place it is. And it's not just because of the nature, it's because of the people, because of all of you. And it's an honor, of course, to return to where I started my career. And thank you to Susan Clark, Peyton, Katie, Cameron, Rich, and everyone at NRCC for inviting me. Thank you to Brot for the introduction. And thank you to all of you for your time. and your endurance today. It's been a long day, so thank you. The first time I came out here, I was a young grad student, and unsurprisingly, I wanted to save wildlife. After just one summer and a few classes with Susan, I learned that to save wildlife, I had to focus on the people. I learned very quickly that saving the environment requires that we connect with each other around common goals, and maybe even more importantly, common values. That connection is the basis of trust. And trust allows for dialogue to determine how resources are used and who gets to decide. And that's fundamentally what democracy is about. It's the shaping and sharing of power through debate and dialogue. And I don't think, do I just push the arrow? The green center, okay. So, I lived in Jackson and Bozeman in the mid to late 90s, and that's me in the photo up there with a giant blue backpack. And 25 years later, as a mom, I look at this picture and just wonder where my sunglasses were. But at the time, I was more worried about some of the policy issues and controversies that were happening out here. So I studied 4 controversial issues that shaped my understanding of both conservation and, more broadly, governance. First, the reintroduction of wolves. Second, bison management in Yellowstone, which I think it was mentioned earlier that that resource issue gained national attention in the winter of 1996 to 97, which was a particularly harsh winter. So more than 1,000 bison were killed, including by National Park Service rangers as they left the park in search of food. So third, grizzly bear recovery. And finally, historic elk migration routes, which informed debates about feeding programs on the refuge. I studied the social and policy dimensions of these issues, and I asked some of the same questions that Susan Clark started the day with today. Who decides how we manage natural resources? How do those decisions get made? Who benefits? And who bears the costs? These questions were relevant then as they are now. In every one of the policy issues I studied, many participants had legitimate claims to be part of the discussion. Ranchers have business interests. State vets have disease prevention responsibilities. Tribes have strong cultural and subsistence ties to bison, as we heard about earlier today. And there are hosts of non-governmental organizations who represent interests like hunters and businesses that depend on tourism. And finally, federal, state, and local agencies have responsibilities to serve all of those publics, and that's quite a challenge. Decision-making was not easy then, and in a lot of ways, it's probably only gotten more challenging. And so this is where the second question I mentioned comes in. How we decide how resources get used is critical, and that's what these books are about that Brot mentioned. And I think some of you might even be quoted in these books. I think the lesson here is that this community has a lot to teach in answering that question of how we decide how natural resources are used. And again, throughout the day and in the awards, we've heard over and over again how you all have saved the environment over the past several decades. And that action has come through collective community engagement. And whether you thought about it this way or not, you saved the environment by essentially participating in democratic processes. So I know that controversy over bears, wolves, bison, and elk persist, but wild bison still roam. Wolves have thrived, and grizzly bears rebounded. The last estimate that I read was about 1,000. That's really, truly remarkable. So for those of you who joined earlier today, you heard more recent examples in today's quick talks. And so I summarized also some of the discussion this morning, so I won't go over that again. But I think the underlying message is pretty simple. Your actions matter. And if you come away with nothing else from what I am going to tell you over the next 15 minutes or so, remember that your actions matter. And I think we've heard how they matter throughout today. While we need to celebrate and lean into the power of community action, and I will always celebrate that. That action exists within a larger legal and regulatory framework that allows for public engagement to occur. And more broadly, that legal and regulatory framework ensures that public resources serve the common good and not private gain. And so I'm going to, and that's what this has to do with today, is that regulatory framework. So that brings me to where I spent most of my 23 years in government, working for inspectors general, or IGs. IGs and the offices they oversee are the original fighters of fraud, waste, and abuse. And we actually know how to do it, unlike DOJ. So each federal agency has an inspector general. They're nonpartisan, and this is important. Once appointed, they typically serve under multiple presidents. That is by design. That changed last year. The very first week of the new administration, most of the cabinet-level IGs were dismissed, 17 in total. No reason was given for these dismissals. And it didn't end there. In the months following, more IGs were removed. And the reason, they did give a reason, it was because the IGs were not aligned with administrative priorities. But coincidentally, they were removed after they reported to Congress that they were not getting the information that they requested from agencies, or, shocker, they reported on things that were not working out so well with what the administration was doing. I mean, that's the job of IGs. So someone who spent 20 years in the IG community, I knew that those dismissals were an indicator of what was to come. To help you understand the significance of those firings, I'm going to talk very briefly about the origin of IGs, their mission, and what I see as their role as America's referees. So first, their origin. Congress established inspectors general across government after Watergate to prevent the abuses of power that were committed by Nixon and others involved in the Watergate break-in. So again, their origin was to prevent the abuse of power, to prevent corruption. Second, their mission. Shortly after I started working at the Department of the Interior Inspector General, I went to a friend's wedding, and her dad was complaining that no one made sure government was effective and was spending taxpayer dollars as intended. And I told him that's literally my job. So I think he was happy to hear that. And that's what IGs do. They promote economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. So third and last point on why early IG firings were alarming is that IGs are America's referees. The legal and regulatory framework that I mentioned a couple slides ago, IGs make sure that public officials are operating within it. They call out violations when they see them. So again, IG reports are not usually flattering. And I'm used to other feds complaining about IGs, the way everyone complains about referee calls, and that's what this photo is up here. I coached my daughter's volleyball team. And one of the few times that I got angry with my team was when they blamed referees for the outcome of the game. And as I was putting this talk together, I thought, maybe I was taking it personally because everybody complains about IGs. But of course, the complaints are understandable. But imagine Monday Night Football or any sport being played without referees. It comes down to fairness. However unfair a single call might seem, it is inevitably more fair, even if it is flawed, than if someone with a vested interest in the outcome of the game made the call. So why would you want to threaten or weaken referees? Not only that, but why would you want to make it one of the first official acts, the very first week of this administration? So attacks on IG signaled an attack on broader democratic systems, on the rule of law, which paves the way for corruption, grift, and abuse of power. So ecological systems have indicator species, and democratic systems have inspectors general. They are democracy's indicator species. A lot of people refer to IGs as watchdogs, and I would say that probably most IGs would prefer to be called watchdogs than an indicator species, but given the theme of today, I'm still going to think of them as indicator species. So if the IG firings were an indicator, what came next? I'm going to talk about 3 subsequent threats to democracy that directly threaten the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. The first is cuts to the federal workforce. The second is cuts to grants. And the third are attempts to use public land for private gain. I'm going to focus on the actions of 2025, but I want to point out, and I think it's important to say, that the conditions that allowed for these actions to occur were decades in the making. So certainly the past year has been more problematic than any decade before it. But the problems, the underlying ones, go beyond this administration. So it's not just about the next election. So cuts to the federal workforce. Grand Teton National Park lost 25% of its staff. Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho lost between 14% and 19% of federal jobs. That wasn't just in the resource agencies, that was across government, but those cuts hurt the economy, community services, and the ability to protect resources. Those cuts put lives in danger. So here are some examples of what that looks like on the ground. Trail maintenance in 2025 was down 22%. The Forest Service treated 40% fewer acres for wildfire risk. And with fewer rangers in Grand Teton National Park, compliance with wildfire bans was down. At the same time, you're treating fewer acres. And as many times as I've looked at these numbers, they hit home for me on my plane ride out here. I watched a movie about the 2018 Camp Fire in California, which was the worst wildfire in California history. Power lines in need of repair sparked a wildfire that spread quickly out of control because of dry conditions. 85 people lost their lives. 50,000 people were displaced. Economic losses were estimated to be $65 billion. So why are we cutting the people who help to make sure that this does not happen again somewhere else? The second threat is cuts to grants. Grant funding for environment and public lands fell 44% in 2025. In Montana alone, $75 million in grant funding for conservation easements was canceled. So we just heard about the importance of conservation easements. A third of that $75 million would have gone to the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Cuts to the workforce and grants are exponential, not additive. And I think that work done over the past 50 years to coexist with grizzly bears is a prime example. There's work done by agencies and work done by researchers funded through grants. The biggest impacts can't be quantified. We're losing institutional memory. This is the kind of knowledge that might not show up in data, but it shows up when people with decades of experience notice subtle shifts, things like subtle changes in bear behavior or in environmental conditions. And we've talked a lot today about connection. We lose connections to the community. We lose trust that was won over decades, years and decades. You can't regain that just by reversing the staffing levels. So that's what happens when you remove the land stewards. Even worse, many of the workforce and grant terminations are not legal. There's 359 lawsuits, most about federal funding, agent cuts, and workforce cuts. Judges have found that they violate due process and equal protection clauses in the Constitution. Now, it's encouraging that the judges are finding this and stopping it. But court cases are decided on a grant-by-grant basis, which places an enormous burden on grantees. And even if they win, there's no guarantee they will resume their work or get paid. Thousands of grants are in limbo. Grant managers are being told that they cannot fund the awards until they get approval from someone above. They don't know who that someone is, and they don't know when they should expect approval. This is making government less efficient and less effective. So, being from DC, just like IGs, I know that DC bureaucrats aren't always the most popular, so I thought it was worth putting this up. Polls show that most Western residents don't support these cuts either. And the Partnership for Public Service has done some estimation of what does this cost in total to all Americans. They estimate the cuts to be $1,000 per taxpayer, approximately, and $165 billion in total, and I would say that's probably a significant underestimate. So this is what we're paying to provide fewer services, fund fewer jobs, increase risk to public safety, and reduce resource protection. So the actions that I've talked about so far provide some insight into who pays the price for decisions made over the past year. Using public land for private gain may begin to answer who might benefit. The Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem has a lot to lose here. And I want you to focus on the op-ed title at the top, or in the green box there. Federal land can be home sweet home. This was written by the Secretaries of Interior and Housing and Urban Development. In March of 2025, they proposed adding affordable housing as a new category of multiple use on national forests, alongside mining, grazing, and timber. And they pursued an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, to make that happen. About the same time, the budget reconciliation bill included a provision to sell 3.3 million acres of public land for development, just outright sell it. So the two ideas became conflated because they both significantly threaten public lands, and the public backlash was enormous. A Wilderness Society map showing what land would be at risk got 1.87 million clicks and 900 media mentions. So the at-risk land is the dark green, and the red arrow is where we are right now, and you can see how much land would have been at risk right around where we are. But public pressure was successful. The provision to sell off federal land was dropped from the budget bill, and so far, no lands have been proposed under the MOU for development. And this month, today is the very last day, there was the deadline to make a proposal. So at least for these two, we're probably in the clear. But the battle goes on. You may have heard of Forest Service reorganization. It is not a reorganization. It is a dismantling. So the Forest Service announced plans to close 57 out of 77 research stations and every one of the regional offices. The fiscal year 2027 budget proposal put forth by the president would defund Forest Service research altogether. These cuts would impact 193 million acres in the National Forest System and 800 million acres in private forest lands that depend on Forest Service research and technical assistance. So the impact is beyond even the public lands. The consequences will be severe in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem if these go through. Closing the Intermountain region puts at risk the ability to manage this landscape as a connected ecosystem. We've heard a lot about how special this place is because of that connection. That is at risk. Closing research stations in Bozeman and Hungry Horse jeopardizes their work on grizzly habitat, fire effects, and ecosystem dynamics. You can't manage a ranch without being on the land, and you can't manage public lands without being on the land either. So I'm going to put my IG hat on to pull some of these threads back together. Again, the IG mission is to promote economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. If I were conducting an audit, here's what I would say. It is not economical, efficient, or effective to spend $165 billion to cut government jobs, deliver fewer services, and to waste money defending actions that were clear violations of constitutional rights, actions that did not have to be taken. You can't effectively manage one of the world's most iconic national parks after cutting 25% of its staff. And you cannot conduct meaningful research when you remove scientists from the landscapes and the communities they study, and you certainly can't do it if you zero out their funding. Private and special interests are the ones who stand to gain at the expense of the resources and of the American people. This is happening after the administration weakened oversight and accountability. And the IGs are just one part of that. It's happening across government, that weakening the Justice Department and others that are responsible for that oversight. So they're weakening the ability to prevent, detect, and report on abuse of power for private gain, and then they're abusing power for private gain. And today's talk focused on the environment, but it's happening in healthcare, it's happening in agriculture, it's happening in national security and historic prevention. It is happening across government. So I would argue that saving democracy is the only way to save the environment. Again, I'm going to go back to where I started. Democracy is really the shaping and sharing of power. And what we're seeing now is very anti-democratic. It is the concentration of power into the hands of the few. But I'm going to return again to where I started. Your actions matter. Everyone can do something. One of the most basic things you could do is to stay informed. Disinformation, which is actively trying to mislead people, as opposed to misinformation, which, there could be an honest error. Disinformation is a strategy to confuse the public and to shift the focus. Katie talked about our focus and where we put our attention. And so disinformation shifts your focus away from real problems. So some things that you can do: subscribe to local newspapers and independent journalists like the Yellowstonian, and talk to neighbors, engage with federal workers. If you hear somebody saying something that's inaccurate, correct them. It doesn't have to be a battle. If the media reaches out to you, let them know what you think. The media is part of the democratic infrastructure that holds public officials accountable. As we weaken that oversight infrastructure in government, what happens, that accountability and oversight outside of government becomes more important. You can support local or national nonprofits that are focused on the environment or oversight, and I've got a couple of them up there, including NRCC. I have 4250 more. There's other ones like Project for POGO, GAP, which supports whistleblowers, and a number of others. Engage with your neighbors and build networks, such as the NRCC network, because this is going to take collective action. It's going to take us working together. Vote. There is a lot of talk about possible interference at the polls. There will be groups such as Common Cause that will have poll monitors at polling places to help prevent election interference, and they'll have hotlines on election day to help you know what to do. Use them and make sure others know that those are available. Contact Congress. Call or write your senators and representatives about the issues that are important to you. Things like stopping the Forest Service reorganization, fully funding research and development, pushing for staff to stay local, and if the administration still insists on closing certain offices, they can be housed by federal agencies or local partners. And I do want to say one thing that I have learned over this past year. As a federal employee, I did not engage much with Congress. I've been engaging more over the past year, and have heard from those whose job it is to work with Congress, and also from members themselves and from their staff, that what you hear a member say publicly is not always what they do when they're not in the spotlight. And I say that as a positive thing. So it might not sound like they are hearing you and listening and taking action based on what you tell them, but sometimes they do, and they just can't come out publicly. And then I think one of the levers that has not perhaps been used enough over the past year, but there's opportunity, is business, putting pressure on businesses. And I mean bigger businesses. And there's a website called Save USFS, Save the U.S. Forest Service, saveusfs.org, and they have companies to reach out to urge them to pressure Congress to save the Forest Service and save research and development. and to speak out publicly against the Forest Service. And these are companies who built their brand, who built their business based on recreation and based on the fact that there are public lands. There is also a handout that will be on the bar, and it looks like this, so if you're looking for it out there. And I can always send a digital copy as well. This handout is based on a book by a researcher named Timothy Snyder, and it's called On Tyranny. And I'm going to tell a little bit of a short personal story here. When the IGs were fired and when we were getting daily emails about how we should leave government and go do something productive, and if we didn't leave, we would be fired anyway, I was pretty, I had a hard time getting out of bed. It was tough. And nobody around me seemed to be quite as alarmed as I was. And then one of my coworkers, an investigator who's done some international work, handed me this book, and he said, we need to get these to everybody. And it gave me hope that there were things that we could do. And so I decided to start a nonprofit. So it really inspired me, but it gives you things that are small to larger actions. And it's something that you can also share with those who might not be as inclined or as engaged as you are in direct action. And so I urge you to take a copy and to look at it. And Timothy Snyder studies failing democracies and how residents in those governments can reclaim their freedoms and rights. And this was a book that he developed specifically to hand out kind of as a field guide. So I've got 2 more slides. I just want to remind you that these strategies work. And it wasn't 33 million acres, it was 3.3 million acres. But remember, 3.3 million acres last year was saved because of public pressure. And we've heard today again about all of the other successes in this valley. And then I'm going to close again with your actions matter. Both a thriving democracy and a thriving environment depend on trust, shared purpose and shared values, and shared power to achieve that purpose and to live by those values. The challenge comes in putting this concept into practice because it requires people with different interests willing to do the hard work of solving problems together. But I believe in everyday heroes coming together to solve problems, and I believe that you all are the everyday heroes, and I think we've heard that today. And do we sit now?
Wow, thank you. Inspiring, Christina. We're a little bit short on time, but I'd love to start off with one quick question. I mean, you painted kind of a bleak picture of the government programs and operations that are happening right now, and yet you are hopeful for the democratic process and people outside of government being able to change things. What about those who are still inside the government? Do they have any reasonable or viable recourse to take action as well?
Yep, and so I'm looking at my phone because I have some notes here. I'm not texting up here on stage. I keep in touch with a lot of current federal employees. And the first thing I want anybody that's still in government to know is that you are appreciated and that those of us on the outside do understand how difficult it is and how they're intentionally trying to traumatize the federal workforce. And so there is appreciation for all of you that are still in. So there's 2 groups that I work with that provide direct support to federal workers. The first is called We Are Well Fed. They provided more than 100 workshops on career advice and mental well-being. They have a website, and it was started by a former federal employee. The second is called Federal Workers Alliance for Democracy. Their mission is to help current federal employees uphold their oath of office, which is to the Constitution. They have about 2,000 members across the federal government, and let me tell you, this group is active. I'm on a number of Signal chats, and I get probably 500 messages a day. So I'm happy to talk to any current feds about this group, and you can find more about their activities on their website. But I think one of the most important things that I have seen, one of the most important services that this group provides is a sense of solidarity and support. Their federal employees have a good community, and it's been ripped apart. And so there are those still outside of government that just recently departed that are there to support you, and those inside too, to feel that sense of community. And I'm also part of a coalition that's planning to gather information from federal employees on what current federal employees need to feel supported and to stay in government, because we do need people that know government to stay in government. So if you are interested in filling out that survey or being in touch with that group, please let me know, and I'm happy to put you in touch with them. And then there are also a number of alumni groups out there, depending on what agency you're in.
Yeah. Now, do you feel that there are ways that citizens can engage in oversight and perhaps help the IGs do their job, citizen watchdogs or something? You mentioned earlier that one of the southern states has a citizens IG group, and that you're hoping to expand upon that or build upon it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critical that external groups, again, especially now, are paying attention to what's happening and doing what they can to call out what they see in government. So IGs rely on whistleblowers, on allegations, on information coming from mostly federal employees. Clearly, there's more fear around that than there would otherwise be. And so one of the things that I want to do with 4250 more, my co-founders want to do, is think about more innovative ways to do oversight, not just in the things that we look at, but in how we get information. And there is, I don't remember, I think it's Mississippi or Louisiana, has a citizen IG initiative, and this is one of the state or local IGs, because in addition to the federal inspectors general, there are state and local IGs, and so I think that idea of citizens paying attention, and there are organizations that are oversight organizations as well, whether it's at the local level and finding out who to contact in the local level, or if it's something happening at the federal level, you also can contact the Inspector General, or contact another external group if you see something, so that we can take collective action on it. Nobody could do this alone.
Great. For those of us who are a little bit older, we've kind of noticed, I would say, a shift in the younger generation's view of wilderness and wildlife. I mean, there are many exceptions, but nature deficit disorder is something that's been talked about, especially in the context of urbanization and social media and all of the distractions of modern life. And with that maybe comes a different relationship with the natural world. A couple of years ago, I asked Chip Jenkins, the superintendent here, what his biggest management challenge was. And he said that it was misbehavior, and that people are not acting as they should. They're acting illegally, driving RVs and recreational vehicles off-road and that sort of thing. And so I'm wondering how we can reconnect people with nature and let them find out all of the mental and physical benefits that our natural world provides, and hopefully instill a sense of ownership and identity and community around that. Do you have thoughts on how we can move in that direction?
Well, first, you probably want to bring back the rangers that monitor that that kind of activity. But I think it depends on where you are. And you know, we talked a little bit earlier. I think in urban areas, people appreciate even just a couple square blocks of nature. I mentioned in grad school, I took an urban forestry class, and I went into a school to get their perspectives on what they'd like to do with some of their vacant lots. And I think it was a 6 or 7-year-old raised his hand, and he said he wanted to create an urban park, because if the vacant lot near his house had been an urban park with green space, his uncle probably wouldn't have gotten shot. So I think we have the opposite problem in cities where nature actually helps to prevent crime and wrongdoing. I don't think it's that people don't value nature. I think it's that we don't behave in ways that align with our values. And I'm not sure exactly how to change that. But I think that it's more about our incentive structures and about accountability. When people are not acting in ways that are aligned with our values and certainly with our laws, there has to be accountability, or there's no reason for them not to continue behaving in the same way.
Mm-hmm. It seems that the government, the administration right now at least, is setting these agencies up for failure. You're spending time in Washington, D.C. Can you describe that process? I mean, you must be able to see it visibly in daily life, even before you left American forests, or I mean, certainly right now it seems to be a crisis.
Yeah, I mean, I think whatever we're hearing in the media, it's far worse inside the agencies. I cannot believe the dedication of these federal employees who are trying to continue to fulfill the mission with every obstacle being thrown at them. I will say that I've seen some cracks and been in discussions where others have seen cracks, and so I think it's important to pay attention to those and to understand that I think there was a slide up earlier today with the foundation cracking and some tape over it, but we actually want these cracks to happen where, you know, this kind of push to get rid of federal employees, to withhold funding, to cut grants to states that voted for Democrats. We want to see those cracks. And so I think, again, even if you don't think your members are listening because of what they say publicly or because of what party they belong to, it's important to reach out. The other thing that I have heard repeatedly, and I think it makes sense, it kind of goes with this theme today of connection, building relationships, is that even if an elected official, and I'm talking mostly about federal because that's my frame of reference, but certainly local officials and state officials, even if an elected official or their staff doesn't take immediate action on something that you come to them with, either a concern or some information that you have, building that relationship and making them aware of that issue, again, making sure that their attention is focused on the areas that are important to you, it creates the space so that if an opportunity comes up, then you don't have to do all that that foundational work of building the relationship and of informing them what is important to you as a constituent. So it can be disheartening, but I would say keep engaging with the people who do have the power right now.
Great. We have time for just a couple of questions. I think the mic gets sent around here. Any questions for Christina? Up there?
Go for it.
Here.
All right.
Oh, box mic. All right.
Go for it.
I feel like I'm back in Sesame Street. Dr. Bruner, two things. First, having worked as an advocate, my name's Phil Hawker, National Sierra Club Board, failed to reform the 1872 mining law, thanks to Senator Reed. But I completely endorse your support and statement about the importance of offices of Inspector General. I completely agree. About speaking to members, I would propose, this is your program, so you can redirect, but if you feel about something, you should tell your member of Congress how you feel. And when Gene and I, when we lived here full-time, had good personal relationships with all three members of the Wyoming delegation. We didn't agree on many things, but they knew how we felt, including on the things we didn't agree on. And I have gone since to meet with one of the members of the current delegation in a very friendly way. We had other outside relationships. You can check my criminal record if you want. And she said, I said, people in the Jackson area are very concerned and we'd like to have you consider adding more wilderness. And she said, no one has ever said anything, or no, I made it statewide. And she said, no one has ever said anything to me in my entire term about that. Well, that needed to change, of course, but it's very simple. I mean, we must not, even the members that we don't think are going to support us, shouldn't be able to walk away by saying, no constituent in the entire state has ever expressed a concern about this to me. We can fix that. This is easily within our power, and it's worth the effort.
Yeah, just remember, they work for us.
Thank you.
Or they're supposed to.
And I'll get you.
See one there? Yeah.
Dr. Bruner, thank you very much. This is on. It sounds like the green one's on. It's on.
I can repeat it.
Toss it. Thank you. Good catch. Okay. Whoa. I'm a teacher in the Valley, and my husband and I have been advocates for wilderness things. I do a lot of LGBTQ advocacy. I'm sorry, I'm nervous. We've written our representatives forever. Alan Simpson was a different man. Right now, John Barrasso responds with reason. Hageman takes me a week to address her misinformation. So I know there's no easy fix. Is it worth it?
I think it is. I mean, I think it's easy for me to say because I'm not the one, beating my head against the wall. But I think you never know when something's going to tip, right? That when there's going to be that moment. I mean, like look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, left criticizing the federal government, and the National Rifle Association and other gun advocate groups came out criticizing the administration after Alex Preddy was killed because they tried to blame the fact that he was carrying a firearm, which was legal, right? So you never know. I think that is, somebody suggested earlier, like we have an opportunity right now. And I'm not super like hopeful and cheery about that, but I do think that we are at a unique moment where there are opportunities to engage with groups that maybe we wouldn't have been able to engage with just 2 years ago. And it doesn't mean you have to agree on everything, right? You might still disagree on abortion rights or gun control, but if you can agree that our elected representatives should be listening to us, that not everything that the administration decides to do should be rubber stamped. If we can agree that we live in a democracy and that we have freedoms and we have rights, and we can work together to call out the actions that overstep that, we don't have to agree with them on all the policy issues. So I would say continue, and I think that we're at a unique moment where we can come together on values and advocate on those values around democratic processes, and then have an opportunity to fight it or over the other things.
Well, thank you, Christina. We've run out of time. I think Katie has a word to say, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This was a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and we have a reception out in the lobby, and I know that Christina would be more than happy to continue this conversation over food and drink. Thank you all for being here, for your commitment to conservation. Thank you, Brot, for moderating. Thank you, Christina, for coming in from DC, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.